a hearty welcome to all of you. I'm Steve Rohde, chair of this wonderful group. Really honored to facilitate today's meeting as we remember Reverend James Lawson. We're very pleased that we moved quickly this week, given the events of Sunday and Monday in losing Jim Lawson. And I want to thank our communications director, Rick Banyales, for jumping in, and I'll be introducing our guests, Bonnie Boswell and Robert Corsini, and there'll be some time at the end for further remembrances and reflections from all of you. I simply want to start with Jim. And we have a special way of doing that right now.
Let's all be straight from the places our God where we met thee. Let's our hearts from beneath the wine of the world we forget thee. That'll be thee, thy
In these last few days, thinking about Jim Lawson, I've been sad and have grieved his passing, but it has been balanced by such gratitude for the life and the work that he leaves behind, that he has had such an impact on so many people, a handful of us, but one of the largest turnouts ICUJP has ever had on these Zoom meetings today. But we know the lives that he touched, and we know the people that he influenced. And it truly is a life that mattered and made a difference. And I think because of that, we join Dolores and his children and his wider family and wide circle of friends and colleagues in mourning his death. But it is leavened by a sense of accomplishment and all that he has left behind. I too remember meeting Jim. I was in awe of him. I thought I was in the presence of a towering figure in Los Angeles and across the country and across the world when he, because of his longstanding friendship with Reverend George Regas, who convened ICUJP, called on Jim to join him, called on Rabbi Leonard Beerman and Dr. Maher Hatout. They all knew this had to be an interfaith effort. They all had had the experience of what America was about to launch into after the attacks of 9/11. They had enough knowledge and wisdom and experience to know that there were two paths that the United States could take at that moment. And they feared and were prescient in knowing that the path the United States took was why we needed to remind everyone as we formed the name Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace, and the motto that religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. Jim had so much to do with the conception of ICUJP, and was a principal architect of our earliest work. And it is that architecture, that structure, that has lasted these 23 years. With some of you, I remember sitting shoulder to shoulder with Jim at the early meetings. And then I got to know him personally. He was always a kind person. He got to know my wife, Wendy, and would greet her by name. He even bumped into her in the hallways of the Superior Court one day. He always had a kind word. His relationship with Dorothy was deep and loving, and whenever I saw them together, that was so important to understand that a man of peace and love, that all started at home with him and his children. And then we were able to call on Jim constantly throughout the years for a variety of events at Holman and then elsewhere. He was also instrumental in supporting the work of the Black Jewish Justice Alliance, which continues to this day. You can't do better than Martin Luther King calling Jim Lawson, quote, the leading theorist and strategist of nonviolence in the world. That says so much. That's what Jim dedicated his life to. And for many people in our wider culture, they would call Martin Luther King by that label. But it was Martin Luther King that called Jim that. Jim had a view on the civil rights movement. He often asked me in introductions and talks and to change the phrase civil rights movement to the nonviolent movement for America. That's what he was about in those years and throughout his life, the nonviolent movement for America. We're going to have a program that will give us an opportunity to learn more about Jim. And we're very grateful to Robert Corsini because he has captured Jim so often on videos. Robert has been a backbone of ICUJP and has given us archives to rely on in these moments. And here is one of those videos where Jim speaks directly to the interfaith movement.
Interfaith work in Los Angeles and a variety of other places in the United States has developed in primary form because practicing religionists in the Islamic, Jewish, Christian religions in the United States, because we are a strong bed of this, but also in Hinduism as well, a strong sense that human preciousness, humanity has a sacredness about it, and that teaching and that sense of love and compassion is to be found in all of the major world religions, as well as in much of the poetry and literature of the past of the human family. So ecumenical interfaith work has been one of the forms of religion in most of the 20th century. That whole process has been troubled and hurt by the various ways in which racism and male chauvinism has come to the attention of the nation. many of the ways in which this is expressed in the media in the United States today never took place in the 20th century. So this is strictly an evolutionary process. An evolutionary process that has been encouraged by Black Lives Matters campaign, and by GLBTQ organizing, by all kinds of people in the United States who've recognized some of the chains that are on the human race and how these have to be dismantled, unshackled.
The first message I got Monday that Jim had passed came from Bonnie Boswell. Bonnie has been a wonderful friend for many years to me. She was a close colleague of Jim Lawson, as she'll explain today. I had the privilege of being on a television show that Bonnie produced, in which Jim was the host. And then through the years, Bonnie was instrumental in the early days of ICUJP and ever since then. So we've set aside some time today for Bonnie's reflection on Jim Lawson.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces. I've missed you, and I'm glad we can be in community. And I am heartened by the fact that we are those folks who said, are people full of hope, right, and determination. So yes, so I just want to, before I forget, because I might forget, I want to do a quick thing that relates to this kind of as a commercial, but I did a piece for PBS called, it was the conversation I had between Jim Lawson and attorney Brian Stevenson. It's going to be re-aired here on PBS this coming Sunday at 6 p.m. So please let people know. It's only 30 minutes, but you can imagine these two amazing men talking. They put it all out there. So I want to share that. And then I have an article about Jim that's is scheduled to appear, we'll see, on Sundays in the Sunday's LA Times. So anyway, just wanted to share that. Yeah, I met Jim really, many, many years ago. I didn't know much about him. He didn't know much about me. And suddenly I was being brought on to be his co-host of his TV show. It's like I appeared, and his producer. And so we kind of had to kind of feel each other out, like, who are you? What, it was like that. Because, and I felt we're going to be talking to a live audience nationally. How are we going to do this? How, we're different in some ways. We have similarities, but I just didn't understand, I mean, I was a Buddhist. He was a Christian minister, even though my grandfather had been a minister. It's like, how are we going to talk about social issues if, I don't know if we're coming from the same place. Anyway, Jesse Jackson was one of our first guests. And I knew Jesse from Chicago. He'd been on my mother's board, my mother was on his board of Operation Push. And so he walked in the studio. He didn't even say hello. He looked at me. He hadn't seen me in many years. He looked at Jim, and he came looking back at me. He said, "Bonnie, this is a brilliant man." And so I thought, okay, let's go. Because, I knew Jesse would never say that lightly. And I found out how incredibly right he was. I would get on that live set, and Jim would always say something that was so brilliant and amazing and connecting the dots in ways that I could not have begun to think about. I'd be sitting there writing notes live like I was in school, because it was like, what was that about? Just brilliant. So, we got along very well and, really developed a warm friendship over the years. One of the first things he said was, "Call me Jim." So he wasn't about being revered. It was this really, life to life, human to human. Then one of the things I enjoyed discovering about him were those little quirks that kind of gave him character. And, maybe a lot of people didn't know about his love for using purple felt pens when he wrote signatures. He loved that. He loved wearing cowboy boots all the time, as much as he possibly could. And songs. So I thought that was really endearing and fun just to know that about him. So when I really got a sense of importance of this man, I was all like, okay, we got to go on a road trip. And so we did go to Chicago. He spoke at Operation Push. And in that speech, he started talking about how in Eastern Europe, the people who gathered, only 8 people gathered together for these vigils and candlelight vigils on Monday evenings. And they were singing "We Shall Overcome" to encourage them to bring down the wall. I'd never heard that before. And this little circle of 8 would increase, increase, and increase, increase till, eventually the wall just had to come down because the people's, demand for it in essence. I also took him to Harvard, where I'd gone to school. I had a lot of problems going to Harvard just because ideologically I wanted to be in the South registering people to vote. There I was at Harvard. It was all kind of a little bit of a disconnect. But at any rate, one of the things I did there was I interviewed Harvey Cox, who was a theologian and head of the department there, emeritus of theology. And I grabbed somebody who had a microphone, and because I knew that there was a relationship between Jim and Harvey Cox. And so I just put the microphone in front of Harvey Cox, and he said, "I will not get to heaven for all the books I have written." He said, "I will get to heaven. They'll let me in because I introduced Jim Lawson to Martin Luther King." And that was the truth, because as Cox said, he said, King, of course, had tremendous oratory skills and all of that, but he didn't have, as in Harvey Cox's words, this kind of tactical understanding that Jim had. And Jim, when the two met, Jim had already spent 14 months in a federal prison for refusing to go to the Korean War. So he understood about the relationship between war at that time and what we, were thinking at the time calling as civil rights, the justice movement. And so the integrity of this man was just so overwhelming. And of course, King immediately said, "Jim, don't go to Yale, where you're going to get your divinity. We need you to go to Nashville to help us, to show us how to do this movement." And that's what Jim did. And then I took him to DC once, and I knew John Hope Franklin from Chicago. He was one of the other professors there who were Black at the University of Chicago, my mom being the other one. And so I knew him well, and we had a conversation, and it was fascinating. I was moderating, but again, I was just like, listening to these two guys. And Jim had such a knowledge of history. He would say, "Yeah, well, remember what happened in 1953? And he went on from there. And John Hope was like, "Yeah, I guess that's right." So, his concepts were really profound. I also love the fact that, his interpretation of Christianity was one that I could really understand and relate to. And wasn't one that I'd heard in many, delivered from the pulpit so often. But he said, I remember, he said, "Jesus never said, 'Believe in me.' He said, 'Follow me,' as in do as I do," right? So it wasn't, again, like having something outside of yourself that was loftier than you were. It was understanding that you had this power inherent in your own life. So I was so happy to see that, up close and personal, and just get to know him as a human being, and his humility, his sense of self-discipline. He used to fast once a week when I first met him. It was like one of his things that he just did. And living a modest life. I mean, it wasn't frugal, but it was, keeping it in check, right? So that he could just really have that connection to this spiritual world. So I just really was always learning at his feet all the time, happy to try and support him in any way I could, and just really was incredibly grateful for the impact that he had on me and how I was thinking and approaching the world. I want to kind of pivot a little bit to share with you some of the ways in which I think he has talked about the world and affected, again, how I think about it and approach it. I will send you, this is taken from an article that the SGI, which is Asoka Gakkai International Buddhist group that I belong to, had a conversation with Jim for their newspaper in Japan, which 1 million people read this paper. And so it's an amazing article, and I will make sure that we send it to Steve so you can all get it. But I just kind of want to go through some of these bigger points that Jim talked about all the time, and that were impressive to me. And he was always talking about the Declaration of Independence. So, I wasn't so sure about the American values, if, as a young woman protesting a lot. I was like, but he's always lifted up this Declaration of Independence, the preamble, and understand he was saying the articulation, even though we have not fully lived up to it, but the articulation of these values was a revolutionary idea, particularly coming from people with a European background that had kings and all that kind of stuff. The idea that all people were created equal, they had the right for liberty and peace, and to be able to live in this kind of fashion. So that was a touchstone for him. He also talked about, and repeatedly recently, and this is in the conversation with Stevenson, how America is really being poisoned by racism, sexism, violence, and plantation capitalism. Plantation capitalism being motivated by greed, not, helping. And, of course, the idea is, okay, how do we transform that? So in my work, that's what I'm trying to do, is lift up the antidotes to the poison and share those. But to have him articulate them so succinctly has been helpful for me. He also talked about to be a human being, essentially, is we have to be able to recognize the dignity of every other life. That's the starting point. And when I saw him give the eulogy for John Lewis, who was one of his students in Nashville, I was just struck for the first time that Jim had gone to India to study the Gandhi movement. And one of the tenets of that movement was to basically bow your life to the person standing in front of you, recognizing that no matter who they were, they had life within them. They had this spirituality within them. And to really acknowledge that, to not disparage anyone. So I thought that was, a significant point, that he was looking for that posture with regard to other human beings. And he said, this is the way that we can move forward, essentially, is to, first of all, have that as a tenet for our own lives. He said that both Black people and white people must heal the wounds of their souls, right? And this is the challenge for world religions, which was to help people to heal these wounds, because this is a traumatized planet we're living on, for lack of anything. But when you look at what's happening across the world, there are people who are reacting out of trauma, right? And so you have to heal that trauma in some kind of way that is helpful, that can help those people turn the corner and convert that trauma into being helpful human beings. See me moving along here. He talked about, again, this idea of personal transformation that can happen when you confront people who are different than you. When I say confront, I don't mean in a confrontational negative way, but when you are willing to engage in dialogue with that person. The dialogue was in the face-to-face connection with people was one of the ways that we can transform ourselves. So the dialogue really has to do about being willing to listen as the first step, not with the agenda of persuading, but with the openness to go, okay, why am I here? What can I learn? And to acknowledge the person in front of you. So he said, we can spread the wave of change from, this posture into our politics, into the economy. And then he also started talking in this article about Gandhi, King, and Ikeda and what they had in common, even though, again, they might have been from different faith groups. But he was talking about a capacity that each faith group had within them, this understanding that they had to do personal work. It was about personal transformation. That's where you start, and that transformation can move the world forward. He said, and I'm summing up, that the world's religions need to have this concept of peace and internal revolution, or conversion, called it. And this is the way people would break down their own hidden inhibitions of truth and join the human family. So those are the larger topics that, I really was inspired by in terms of Jim, his life, his legacy. But in closing, I want to say that I have been processing, Jim's transition, I want to call it. But from my standpoint, thinking as an SGI Buddhist, I really feel that all life including human life, is eternal. And just like we need to go to sleep, or the trees in winter lose their leaves in order to restore themselves, I feel like Jim is not gone so much as in resting his life, which deserves rest, but he's very much with us. And our life condition impacts him in this restful state of his life, just like an unborn child's mother's life condition impacts him. So what I am choosing to do is to model his life through my behavior and caring for the torch. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
As far as I know, the Jewish and Black people in the United States have always had a linkage or a sensibility to one another that has meant we have often been in the same struggle for change. So I have known this probably all my life, since at least high school. In terms of the politics of things, I have known that for 100 years, in the presidential years of our elections in the United States, the Jewish community and the Black community have voted always on the same side. We both know what it means, what it is meant to be in the United States with an invitation to be here that is hostile. And if we have not thought that there was a wide enough difference between two presidential candidates, we knew on which side we had the better chance of continuing to dismantle the hostility and to allow the United States to become more of the country it needed to become. I think that came to a head in the 1950s and 60s, the late 1950s and 60s, as in fact a new dimension in struggle for Black people came into being. The school decision of May 17, 1954, where for the first time Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP got the Supreme Court to make a unanimous decision that segregation does not permit equality. Jim Crow law obliterates the possibility. Segregation law and spirit and custom is in contradiction to the Constitution. That between 1789 and May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court has only given largely negative decisions to Black people, to women, to Asian people, to Indians. So that Supreme Court decision of 1954 is what caused the emergence in many ways of a new spiritual awareness among all kinds of Black people and Jewish people. We knew in the Black community that the Eurocentric communities in the United States were largely too supportive of anti-Semitism and racism. I knew that. Our most important allies, I think this can be said, the most important allies for the nonviolent movement of America, 1953 to 1973, and the most important allies in the South, where I lived for 17 years and worked directly with Martin Luther King Jr. in the development of that movement. Our most important white allies were Jewish people. Many could not speak out and did not speak out, but a lot of their leadership where I worked in Birmingham, in St. Augustine, Florida, in Nashville, Tennessee, where I lived for a time, in Memphis, Tennessee, where I lived for 12 years in the struggle. The Jewish community were our most sensitive and human allies. There were fears in the Jewish community that too close identity would cause an outburst of anti-Semitism, which is true. But the sensitivity to that alliance was a problem for the whole nation. Because in the white community, any white person who identified with desegregation, with multi-ethnicity, with the fact that there is such a thing as an interfaith dimension of life to which we should all belong, in the white community, it would be very horrendous in 1960 to identify with that ecumenical spirit, with that interfaith spirit.
Thank you. I want to thank Bonnie so much. You put a name on what I was struggling to express at the beginning of our program about Jim being eternal. That's what I was trying to grasp, that it salves the wound of his death to know he is eternal in the best, broadest sense of his ideas. And I love the notion that what we do now can lift his spirit. What we do now to believe in his theory of nonviolence and to live that and promote that will give his spirit peace and calm. And we should dedicate ourselves to that. Your mention of his devotion to the Declaration of Independence, we just heard his devotion to the Constitution. I wrote a book some years ago about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and it was the greatest compliment I ever received that Jim said that book was on his shelf close to his desk, and he would consult it from time to time. We just had a short video produced and developed by Robert Corsini. I've told you that Robert has been a backbone of ICUJP. Robert, you had a video on war and patriarchy as well. So I'm going to turn the program over to Robert, and you decide what and in what order to show your further videos.
Great. Thank you, Steve. It's, of course, a tremendous honor to be part of this conversation. I've had the opportunity to meet and interview Jim on several occasions. Every time I've met with him, it was, you knew you were dealing with a master of thought and philosophy and spirituality, a rock to our culture and society. But I think fundamentally, and I want to thank Bonnie for much of what she said, of course, at the core of Jim's ethos was about war and peace, and how we find, as humans, we find a way to neutralize tendencies towards violence in a way that's nonviolent. So I want to share, and I think another reflection in going through some of this interview material that I have of Jim's, I realize he's like the first intersectionality founder. I mean, everything he talks about is, and you realize it's a woven fabric that is his essence and the essence that he has communicated. And the next short video that I'm going to share with you is really the connection to the problem, or identifying the problem, the core of the problem in so much of what we face is about the role women play in our society. And so I won't say any more. I'll let Jim speak to what he says here. So hold on one moment and I'll roll this piece.
In the 20th century, wars primarily killed. Bombing and raids and guerrilla attacks primarily killed women and children. Now that's been documented. Did not kill the presidents or the generals, the prime ministers. Did not kill the wealthy. It killed ordinary women and children. The wars and the violent attacks. The reason I am glad that the Me Too issues are being discussed now is because that's part of our problem. The woman has the special concern for the well-being of the family and of the children, as in a far superior way, frequently to the husband, to the father. So the emergence of women who can be poets and elected officials and business people and engineers in the academy is a critical kind of day-by-day change that has to take place, no matter who fights it or why they fight it. Because a woman brings a gender-oriented power to the table that we need for the world to become a better place to live in. When I came to this congregation in 1974, I frankly told our leadership in the congregation that I would be recruiting women as associate pastors. There was some static about it and some face-to-face talk where people told me they were opposed to it. But my point of view prevailed in the official processes of making decisions when we needed an associate, so that we got the first women pastors in this large congregation of 2,000 or more members. And two of the people who served in my 25 years as associate pastors are people who are extremely loved by this congregation right today. They cannot come back to this congregation without the outward enthusiasm of the members of the congregation for them. Now that's an illustration why we have to desegregate, we have to desexualize, so that more people can bring those human options to our tables at every level of life.
So in every time I analyze Jim's oratory, it's truly inspirational. His sense of story was always from the heart, from the mind, that came together in this magnificent nexus of confidence in the meaning and power and truth of what he was saying. This consistently was communicated every time you met with him, was this profound sincerity based in experience. And I think that is a tremendous model that I reflect on, having had and the ability to take from someone a body of knowledge in the form of their oratory. And Jim Lawson was a master at communicating the great arc of his life and how that connected to so many different things that we're all sharing here today is quite astounding. I kind of referred to before as the fabric of his spirit and his ministry connects so many different things in what the progressive left, and again, I hate these terms, but it's true. The core values of Beerman, Regas, Lawson, MLK, connecting to Gandhi. I mean, it's here. This is what interfaith is. It is the core idea of acceptance and engagement with the other. When you realize the other is really ourselves, I think Jim really was a master at all of that. So as I was going through this interview, I shot with Jim for the Beerman Foundation. In fact, I realized, toward the end, I asked him a really important question that I'm really glad I asked him. And I won't say any more. I'll just let this section of the interview play out. I want to take a moment and reflect a minute. Rabbi Beerman, George Regas, Martin, Heschel, what would their message be today, given what this country is facing?
All of them, George Regas, Leonard Beerman, Abraham Joshua Heschel, represent the highest form and the most lofty, noble notion of the meaning of religion and of human life. All three of them represent that best, which I think is a part of the aim of the Hebrew Christian Bibles, which my thesis is that religion at its best is not dogma, not about belief systems, but about how you live, what kind of a human being you are, and what are you trying to become. So Martin King and I and many others were in that stream of spiritual thought and theology. I've spent essentially 8 to 9 decades of life working to eradicate every form and every vestige of racism or hostility for any kind of human being. And I think that's what Heschel and Regas and King and Leonard would say. They would be working on that issue of trying to help us become what God wants us to become.
And in the moment where we are today, do you feel optimism? Do you feel cynicism? Do you feel about the future?
The human race has many demands upon it. And so the noble visions are often dormant, often overlooked. Public discourse needs more talk about the role of compassion to bind people together in a society. They need to recognize, USA people need to recognize that the underside of love is justice and building a community where human freedom can be practiced and can be enjoyed. The voices in our society today who are saying, well, I'm not going to wear a mask because it interferes with my freedom. Well, that means they haven't yet become human enough to recognize that the mask wearing is one of the ways we act for the well-being of one another, and in all 50 states the commandment that the Hebrew Bible in the books of Torah indicated, thou shalt not kill, is an advantage for the construction of family and neighborhood and village and community and tribe and nation. Thou shalt not kill is not a negative commandment, though it's a thou shalt not, because abusing each other and beating up on each other and destroying each other does not allow for the human race to flourish in the fullness of humanity.
Yes, some truly profound words from Reverend Lawson to share with us today. What can you say? He kind of said it all. So with that idea, I kind of want to just say what an honor to be here speaking about him together with all of you. And we keep going, keep marching with our feet, praying with our feet. And I think that is the message that is communicated from Gandhi through Heschel, through King, through Lawson, right to today. I mean, in order to really transform society, we got to be able to get out there and march. And whether that's digital marching or marching in reality, we're all continuing the march here together. And I'm really couldn't be more honored to be part of this group of people doing this today. So Steve, I'll go ahead and let you take over from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. We're honored. It's so apparent in listening to you and Bonnie how much Jim trusted you, how much Jim was comfortable in your presence, and you created a space. Jim had a young mind. He had a young mind. He was always open to new ideas and to new angles. You're right. He probably is one of the earliest purveyors of intersectionalism. He welcomed Black Lives Matter when it was marginalized and demonized largely. And I love watching him speak, and I loved him in person because you literally saw his beautiful mind at work. Many times in his speeches, he would start slowly. He would find his way, and then he would have that voice of truth, and the crescendos of his public speaking, largely outside of sit-down interviews like this, was always remarkable because he was constantly thinking and applying reason and his ideas to the present day. And I think that's what's so dynamic about Jim, and why we always have so much to learn from him, and why I'm so grateful that Robert, you and your team have captured him, and we have these archives. We're going to take another look at what we have from Jim Lawson. We've now lost the 4 heroes that established ICUJP. Lost only in that sense of their human bodies. Reverend George Regas, Leonard Beerman, Jim Lawson, and Dr. Maher Hatout. And the idea that this little fledgling group of ICUJP now embodies the pillars of their strength and their spirit is remarkable. I'm just sitting here being proud of us, proud that we have sustained ourselves through COVID and onto Zoom as a small fledgling organization. And my board of directors would want me to say at this moment to each of you and the people watching the video of this program that we depend on the kindness of friends and strangers. We depend on your financial support. When you see this video and the invitation you received today, there's a way to donate to ICUJP. If you've been moved by something today, if you've been moved by the spirit of Jim Lawson, please support our work. We want to keep doing this. We want to do another 1,000 webinars. We want to celebrate victories in the cause of peace and justice, and we want to commiserate with each other in dark times. And that just takes some resources and your generosity in doing that. I'm grateful for everyone who has come here today. We now are having some time for your own reflections on Jim Lawson. Now, we invited a few people that I want to introduce specifically, and then I will take hands as I see them coming up. But I was particularly grateful that Phyllis Isabella Shepard has joined us from Vanderbilt. Jim has an unusual history with Vanderbilt University. There is an arc to that history which tells the story of Jim and America as it failed to hear Jim at the outset, but then ultimately it heard him and it has honored him at Vanderbilt. Phyllis, please share your thoughts on this occasion.
Thank you, and thank both of you who already shared beautiful reflections. I so appreciate them. I like the way you just said it has an arc, because we know the narrative of Jim going to the divinity school, working with students around nonviolent direct action, and being arrested in Nashville to desegregate, ultimately being expelled, and this reproach month where he comes back, and has a place, let's say, in the narrative and the ongoing transformation of the university. And the reason I like the term arc is because it is, and has to be, I'm beginning to think, an ongoing arc, meaning it doesn't just happen and there's an event. He's brought back, he becomes a professor, there's a scholarship name, there's now the institute. But, most of us know that institutions have a cyclical life too. And there are always these moments that where the institution has to reaffirm its commitment that they're making at, let's say, a justice-leaning part of the arc, and also the ways in which it retrenches from that. And when Jim spoke at the launch of the opening of the Institute in 2022, he reminded us of that this is ongoing. And right now, given all that's happening in the world, Vanderbilt University is both this is the 60th year anniversary of Jim being expelled. We had students expelled this year. And as they were saying, this is the 60th anniversary. So there's always this tension that has to be lived into to reaffirm the commitment that he called from us. That's one thing. And the other thing I think that he impressed upon me over and over is that love and nonviolence have to be the catalyst, the engine that moves us in the direction that we want to go in terms of justice, and that it's a lifelong commitment. That was impressed upon me so much that I began to say in most public places, I don't say that I am nonviolent. I say I get up every morning, I meditate and pray that I will continue to grow in being nonviolent. And the day that I don't do that, I could be in trouble. Because what I'm trying to communicate is that transformation is lifelong. And it is that so for society as well. Because of his relationship with the Institute and with the university, two of the courses I teach, spirituality and social activism, and nonviolence in theory and practice. The red thread that connects them is that collectively and individually, we have to recommit to this work and this way of being over and over. Stop there.
Thank you, Phyllis, very, very much. It means a lot to us to have you join us, and it means a lot to us that you have given the structure, the architecture to keep Jim's vision going at Vanderbilt. We invited one other person today because I've named the pillars of ICUJP, but we immediately had ever-growing circles of support as we built ICUJP. And Rabbi Steve Jacobs was critical to that development. I invited Steve this morning. He's with us. If you can join us with your brief reflections on your good friend, Jim Lawson.
Thank you. I'm sitting in Denver at the graduation of my granddaughter from college, but I just want to take a minute and thank you, Steve, and everyone. Everybody on this call has shared a journey. We depend on one another. James Lawson was the one that always gave us hope, even in times when we got depressed. I just want to mention one thing, the opportunity that Jim and I had. He years ago, he called and he said, Lori Berenson is being tried in Lima, Peru. He said, we need to go and we need to attend the trial of Lori Berenson, who was involved with a radical group in Peru. And we went and we spent the better part of a week at the trial. Of course, she was convicted. We appealed to the president to no avail. But that week together just vocalized everything that's been said today in our conversations. They were private, but they were public. And we came back and we buoyed each other and in the community. We stayed in touch with the Berenson family. And of all, everybody has individual moments with Reverend Lawson. I cherish that week in particular. And we've always, for 40 years, remained very close friends. We've been by each other's side. On this Sabbath Eve, I just reach out and hope that the word shalom comes from above and below. And yes, we walk hand in hand and heart in heart. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to now use the hand raise feature. If you're able to use that to raise your hand, if you'd like to contribute your reflections on Jim. I will say as an early alert that Bonnie herself has a time frame today and may not be able to be with us the whole time until 9:30. If she leaves the screen while you're speaking, it's nothing against you. It's her schedule. She's been called upon with the LA Times and PBS and everybody to do a lot of work on Jim this week. In that vein, we missed introducing Father Chris Panett, but he left his reflections that even before ICUJP, There were religious communities against war in the Persian Gulf that gave birth to ICUJP. Some of us, part of those early groups that Jim inspired. Our arrests as ICUJP leaders. Actually, Chris did introduce himself at the beginning and mentioned his arrests. Will always remain in my heart for healthcare for all and against war, racism, and violence. Presente. And sorry I cannot stay. On Friday mornings, Father Chris has responsibilities at the hospital. So let me just turn this over. I hope people will be brief to let space for as many of you as possible to reflect on the life and spirit of Jim Lawson. Carol Francis.
Right. Thank you. On his 90th birthday, there's a 90th birthday party for him, a public party. And after the speaker spoke, we were all invited to share reflections, and I'm going to share the same one I shared with him then. In the late 90s, or somewhere in the 90s, IFCO, Interreligious Foundation for Community Organizations, based in Harlem, IFCO Pastors for Peace was mounting their second caravan to Cuba. And they asked us if we were going to take a nonviolent workshop somewhere possible. So just in case the anti-Cuba people did some violent action against us. So Paula asked Jim, and Jim agreed to give a handful of us a workshop, our own private workshop on dealing with hostile people. And we actually walked through these different activities that role played what we'd do, and we'd get in touch with how we felt and what we should do as opposed to how we felt. Flash forward a decade or so, and I was in Palestine with the International Solidarity Movement the year after Rachel Corrie was killed with the ISM. And young Palestinian gave a workshop on nonviolent activities. And the first activity they walked us through, I thought, this is exactly the same one that Reverend Lawson gave us 10 years ago. And the next activity, we role played something else. My God, this is one of Jim Lawson's activities. On and on, just repeating all the same activities I'd done with Jim 10 years earlier, until we got to the, and this is a rubber bullet, and this is a live bullet, and this is a tear gas canister, and this is a sound grenade. Up until that point, it was just all Jim's activities. So as of relating this at his 90th birthday party, I said, James, you are everywhere. You are all over the world.
Rabbi Jonathan Klein.
Thank you so much, Steve. So this has been truly remarkable, and those interviews are just absolutely precious and brings back all the warmth and love of this man, and just his humanity, and his chuckle. I love his little chuckle when he talks about sort of the broken things. He would always throw in this little, like, laugh that wasn't really a laugh. It was identifying just the pain, but in a way that was so beautiful. I wanted to just share, a couple of things that I think also should be added. Thanks. A couple of things that should be added about his overarching vision, and not to take away from all the incredible things that have already been shared. In particular, Bonnie, thank you for your part. He associated himself with two huge movements, in particular, that stand out besides the peace movement. He identified himself as supportive of working people, in a capacity that that led to the formation of Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. He, together with Maria Elena Durazo, built that because he recognized that working people have a deep humanity that was not always being attended to. And I think that's the essence of what that was. The other movement that he was clearly a part of, but we have not mentioned here, is, at least that maybe I missed it, is he was a United Methodist minister. He found a home in his faith. And I think that in both instances, it wasn't that he just accepted these movements as perfect. In fact, quite the contrary. I think without expressing the negative aspects of both movements, he was a man who kept both the religious communities as well as the labor community honest and full of integrity. And he had grounded our vision of justice in a deep, abiding humanism. His focus was not the cutting down of individuals, but rather the building up of the voices that were not always heard. And, in that sense, he was sort of a Howard Zinn type of a thinker. He was a deep humanist who believed that people were created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And I think to give, one of the marks of a great person is recognizing how so many people can see the person from different angles, different perspectives, and no one person can fully grasp the fullness of who a person is, who is great, because they are so multifaceted in their greatness. I value the lunches I had with Jim, and the strategizing, but more than anything, I just loved being in the glow of his wisdom. And those videos are, again, so wonderful because it brings back the thoughtfulness. You could watch his, as I think someone said, about his beautiful mind at work. And I think that we need to root all of it in a recognition of the humanistic values that kept all of our movements honest. We're going to miss that type of vision because he was a master of it. And all of us are standing on his shoulders in our efforts to bring love and compassion for humanity into the mix as we carry forward in our vision of justice. So anyway, I just thought I'd add that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jonathan. You are so right to emphasize CLU, his help to found CLU, and his work on labor. UCLA has the James Lawson Jr. Dolores Huerta Nonviolence Education Project at the UCLA Labor Center. So that's a critical dimension to his work that goes on. Dick Bunce, please.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I've often said of my own father that he was always there when I needed him. And Jim was that kind of person. He was kind of a spiritual father. And, I sometimes I needed him for advice because I was thrown into a situation with the desegregation of the San Fernando Valley, and I needed people like Jim and Steve Jacobs and others to help with that. And they were just right there. It was incredible. And sometimes I really needed him as a speaker, and I kept thinking, he's so busy and he's such an important guy. And yet I just, the only person that can possibly speak to this group effectively and get through would be Jim Lawson. And he was always there. He just never complained, never said, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. How am I going to squeeze this in? Nothing like that. He showed up on time, patient, warm, kind, and so forth. I just want to take time to quickly tell you one little story. He was such a warm and kind man and thoughtful. I was very lonely as I drove my wife out to a city I'd never heard of, Upland, California. to give a candidating sermon at that church. So it was on a Saturday. I was to give this sermon to the congregation and be voted on the very next day. I show up at this church. I knew nothing, very little about it. And as I walked into the office on the day prior, the secretary handed me a letter, and she said, "Oh, here's a letter for you." A letter from me here? Well, it was from Jim Lawson. And it was the kindest, most encouraging thing you can imagine. And it really bolstered my spirits and kind of got me through that whole thing. He had to do some research to figure out the timing and the address to which to send it. He had to take time to figure that one out. I had no idea he even knew I was going there for that purpose. So, I mean, that really spoke deeply to me about how personal a man he was, personal caring for individuals, a real pastor and friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. We are approaching some time limits, so I encourage everybody to be as brief as you can be. Gil Lieb.
Hi. First of all, we have been uniquely privileged to have had this giant amongst us here in Los Angeles for as long as we've had, and many of us have attended his workshops on nonviolence and are aware of all the social justice actions that he's been involved in. But a personal remembrance first, and then a general comment. I was a freedom rider between New York and DC in the early 60s, and not on the main freedom ride where the bus was burned and so on, people were beaten, but still a freedom ride that was organized for a different purpose at that time. And as such, as a person who participated in that, I went to the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Riders that was held in Chicago. And one of the great honors of my life and thrills of my life was to stand with these icons of the civil rights movement, John Lewis, Jim Lawson, and many others, and sing "We Shall Overcome" with them. That was just a real thrill. I just want to point out and add to what Steve said at the beginning about the impact that Jim Lawson had and the civil rights movement had, not only nationally, but worldwide on so many other social justice movements that followed. And I'm just going to name a few of them. In the 70s, the American Indian movement, the women's movement that took full flower at that time, and the anti-war movement, of course, in Vietnam War. But in addition to that, the Arab Spring in North Africa and in the Middle East that was inspired by the example of the civil rights movement, the Occupy movement, and today, of course, with the student activism around the Israeli-Palestinian issue, where the students in many cases have studied the techniques of and the philosophy of nonviolence. So the impact has been so profound for so long and in so many ways and around the world, and it's just remarkable. Thanks.
Thank you, Gil. Rebecca, please.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to Bonnie and Robert and all the speakers today. I never met Reverend Lawson, but I do feel that his spirit lives on here, just because, for example, we have some guests from public counsel today. And when I was in law school, I interned at public counsel on the Children's Rights Project. And I've been thinking a lot about them because I learned recently that the director that I worked under, Jenny Weiss, passed away earlier this year. So it was just heartening for me to to see that they're here and they're still carrying on that good work. When you all were carrying on your great work in ICUJP with Jim, I was a corporate attorney. And so this past year has been very enlightening to me as I've been unemployed. I suffered some serious injuries about a year ago, and started going back to Agape. And a couple of months ago, they honored Reverend Lawson with their Lifetime Legacy Award for his nonviolence work. And I felt really drawn. I had to be there. And I've been upset a lot about the genocides going on in the world. And it took me 2 hours to get to that service because there was a horrible there was 2 horrible car accidents on the freeway and on Malibu Canyon. And but when I got there, I just felt like so much peace hearing him speak and hearing Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith and all the leaders at Agape speak too. And so anyway, I'm inspired by all of you today to just keep on doing the good work and carry on his legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Bob McCloskey, great to see you again. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this today. Of course, Linda and I are both deeply saddened and grieving the loss of a great man, the greatest teacher in nonviolence. We learned so much from him about how to move through politics and try to be nonviolent, working at it all the time. Went to many of his workshops. We first met him in 1984 around a protest when the Olympics came to Los Angeles. And we left Los Angeles in 2014. And throughout those years, we were always in touch with him and going to his workshops and working with him. He was very supportive of the labor movement. Of course, I worked for SEIU. He supported so much of what we were doing with workers. I've been arrested with him several times protesting the wars in El Salvador, Iraq. We saw him about a year ago. We were fortunate enough, about 4 years ago up here in the Fresno area where he was speaking. And he was so warm and kind again, like he always was to us. And we loved him so much and we'll miss him greatly.
Thank you, Bob. So glad you joined us. Daniel, please.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks everybody. And thank you for sharing these videos, and everyone has a different kind of recollection, but they're all weaving through and through his wisdom, kindness, joy, compassion, and a sense of grace and ease that Jim Lawson just brought with him wherever he went. It felt like I never had the feeling that I'm in the presence of this icon of the civil rights movement whenever I was around him from, over the last 15 years or so, because his message was always so fresh. And, when we were working on the Yes on 34 campaign to abolish the death penalty back in 2012, he brought such clear, easy conviction to the message of it was the essence of nonviolence is what he was able to convey to us about that, and the power of nonviolence as well. And speaking with Interfaith Solidarity Network in 2012, he was very clear about the dangers of white Christian nationalism and what we needed to bring by way of soul force, he called it. I'll never forget that term, soul force, that we needed to muster in order to deal with it. He was always so present and current and there. And we've been celebrating his 95 years for the past year, but all of a sudden, he's not here, and it's sad. But we'll carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, very much. Yes, Jim added to my vocabulary plantation capitalism, and soul force. He borrowed or coined those phrases. I certainly connect him with them. We had some people join us, so in our closing moments, I wanted to be sure to allow people to identify themselves and having been here. Aisha Mason, please say hello for us.
I'm glad I'm here this morning. I've been very touched by everybody's share. I don't really think I can say anything about Reverend Lawson yet, but I feel like so many people spoke for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I see others on the screen. Robert Levering, you want to say hi and identify yourself?
Hi. I did not see him very much, but I just resonate so much with the things that are being said, particularly how, his presence was just he was just so calm and so centered. And yet when he began to speak, that there was there was a passion that almost contrasted with that other, but it was also like very clear that his passion came from that very centeredness that he had. So anyway, that's what I'll certainly remember of him. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack Neff, want to say hi and identify yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Jack Neff, and I became acquainted with Reverend Lawson through organizing in coalitions with the Green Party, with CLUJ and ICUJP, and we had some civil disobedience plans, and Reverend Lawson was, an advisor to those CDs, and very fearful conditions to step up against the LAPD and in some of these municipal situations where there's so much political hatred being generated. And it was his clear vision and voice always that led the trainings, and I think it reduced the amount of harm. I just want to share one amazing anecdote, which October 22nd, 2000, at a LAPD protest against police brutality, National Day of Protest Against Police Brutality in 2000, there were about 1,000 people in front of Parker Center on Los Angeles Street when the LAPD advanced on horseback. And they literally led a cavalry charge against people standing, listening to Reverend Lawson. And Reverend Lawson said, he didn't break stride. He's like, well, it looks like we're headed for a confrontation. They're determined. Organizers have tried, but here, this is the situation now. Just sit down and do nothing. And once the people sat down, some of these horses stopped. And it changed the whole tone of it. And I saw that civil disobedience, people were beaten. It was a bad scene. LAPD paid millions for that action against peaceful protesters. And they were held to account. And Reverend Lawson was witness, and just a lot of gratitude to love.
Thank you, Jack. I'm so glad you joined us. Carol Francis, would you hold up the book? Yeah, so this is one of Jim's newest books, Nonviolence and Social Movements. Carol Francis?
It's edited by Kent Wong. It's different essays about Jim's life. The Teachings of Reverend James M. Lawson Jr., edited by Kent Wong, Ana Luz Gonzalez, and the Reverend James M. Lawson Jr. And I'll loan it to anybody who can figure out a way of getting it from me and back to me. But it's a thin book, can be read very quickly. Just really blew me away. Things I hadn't known about him.
This is another one Jim wrote a few years earlier revolutionary nonviolence. That's a wonderful young picture of Jim with Michael K. Honey and Kent Wong, with a foreword by Angela Davis. So all of his teachings are out there for all of us. Rick Banales.
Hi, I'm just amazed at all the stories that I'm hearing about Reverend Lawson. Just an anecdote, when we would meet at Emmanuel, I would usually see him pull in. I heard when he came in, Ray Charles playing from his car. So next time I saw him, I brought him a CD, that because I was working in the record industry. And with all due apologies to Dr. Shepard, I was talking to him at a time when the Vanderbilt basketball team wasn't doing that good. And when he went back to teach, I said, "I'm glad you're going. I was hoping that you would go back and that they were bringing you back to teach the basketball team." He went to India, with the Peace Corps, teaching basketball and tennis to kids. So he just started cracking up. So of course now they're doing fine. So I just wanted to relay that. I also wanted to put in the chat, there's a couple ways that you can find out about ICUJP if this is your first time here. There's a link tree which has a lot of our information, and on speakers that have worked with us before. There's also an Eventbrite link directly. So if you have PayPal or if you want to make a donation to help, we're doing a lot more stuff in the public now, which incurs some costs on its own. So if you can help in any way, that'd be great.
Thank you, Rick. Stephen Fisk.
I remember participating in the civil rights movement in New York City and going to Washington, D.C. for the Great March on Washington. And I remember the feeling that I had, a feeling of correction and connection. And the correction was that I grew up, in a sense of white privilege. And the correction was understanding the depth of the injustice that was prevalent in our world. And the connection was to that place of humanity where our hearts open to love and where we recognize what it means to be a human being. And whenever I was with Jim, I had that same deep, deep sense of correction and sense of deep connection to what it means to be alive and what it means to be a human being connected to the deepest love and the deepest resonance of being a part of a community of humanity. So I'm always indebted to Jim Lawson for all his great presence in my life and in all of our lives. I just wanted to say that much. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Someone is asking, there is a film underway by Karen Hayes on Reverend Lawson, and someone put in the chat earlier that you can go to REV James Lawson Film at gmail.com to contact Karen Hayes. I'm sure she's hard at work finishing that film for the benefit of all of us. I want to thank everybody today. This was a beautiful opportunity to reflect on a wonderful man. I leave this meeting hopeful because I do think Jim was hopeful. He was realistic. He was hard-headed, but he was clear-minded and hopeful. The hope rests only if we follow him. He said, "Follow me, not believe in me," as far as Jesus was concerned. But let's follow Jim. Let's commit and recommit ourselves each day to wake up, to think of Jim Lawson, what would Jim Lawson do today, given the tragedies around the world and in our own country? And let's do something each day in his spirit. I learned once that the one image of heaven, that heaven are the memories you leave behind in the minds and hearts of other people. That's heaven. And Jim is in heaven in the hearts and minds of all of us. So we open our closing circle now to lift up people. We're lifting up Dorothy and Jim's children and grandchildren and wider family who have suffered the loss of a wonderful husband and father and grandfather. Let's close, Steve Jacobs.
I want to thank you for a prayerful, significant, unforgettable day together as we remember Jim and share our journey with each other. You said in your concluding remarks, Stephen, what would Jim Lawson do today? That is so potent because Jim is speaking to us today. The Supreme Court this morning struck down a ban of bump stocks, the most violent elements that are so destructive in our culture and in our society. Jim would speak out against the Supreme Court, against the violence which is just tearing our country apart. This man lives on with us every single day. His prayers, his actions, and everything that he meant to us as individuals, as a community, empowers us even more. I remember several years ago, we were standing with Jesse Jackson, and Jesse told us this story about Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was knocked down in a non-title fight in the 8th round, and he was hurt, and he returned to his corner. And his people said, "You're not going back out, you're hurt, this means nothing." He got up, and the next round, he knocked down his opponent and knocked him out. And afterwards, Muhammad Ali was asked, why did he go out and why did he do this? And Muhammad Ali said, the ground is no place for a champion. When Jim Lawson was spat upon, he didn't act in a violent way. He gave a handkerchief, took out a handkerchief. That man is ever present in our lives. And you have provided us not only the ideals of this person, but for each of us, the ground is never a place for champions. And we share the greatest of champions in our lives day by day, James Lawson Jr. God bless you, Stephen, and all of our friends. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Praise be thou, O God, who has kept us alive and sustained us, and may we continue to honor and do the work and the passions for justice of Jim Lawson.
Thank you, Steve Jacobs. Thank you, everybody. This was beyond our expectations in bringing you together. That's what we try to do every week. We have a very special program with Norman Solomon next week. I want to thank Karen Helfman and Cheryl Grills, who were the planned speakers for today to talk about reparations. We will reschedule them soon, and you will see an announcement on that. I thank them for their flexibility. Thank you to everyone. Please be safe, be kind to each other.